so many occasions. This is unprecedented in British history. The last 2 years gives us no confidence that this government can do a deal in under 2 years. So at some point before December 2020, the focus would then inevitably shift from negotiations on the future relationship to negotiations on an extension to the transition period, including negotiations on what further payments we should make to the European Union. The vague partnership document says, and I quote, "It can lead to a spectrum of different outcomes as well as checks and controls." That doesn't show to me any clarity whatsoever in that document. And there is not even any mention of the famed frictionless trade that was promised in the Chequers proposals. The former Brexit secretary, that's one of the former Brexit secretaries, promised a detailed, precise and substantive document. The government spectacularly failed to deliver it. So, Mr. Speaker, I can confirm this, that Labour will vote against this deal tonight. And, Mr. Speaker, Labour will vote against it because it's a bad deal for this country. And as we have heard over the past week, members in all parties, including many in the Conservative Party, will join us in rejecting this botched and damaging deal. And I welcome the fact there is a clear majority to reject any no-deal outcome. The amendment to the Finance Bill last week demonstrated the will of the House on rejecting the danger, and it is a danger, of a no-deal outcome that would cause such chaos to so many people across this country. But, Mr. Speaker, it's not enough for the House to vote against the deal before us and against no deal. We also have to be for something. So, Mr. Speaker, in the coming days, it is vital that this House has the opportunity to debate and vote on the way forward, to consider all the options available. The overwhelming majority of the House voted to respect the result of the referendum and therefore voted to trigger Article 50. So I say this to our negotiating partners in the European Union. If Parliament votes down this deal, then reopening negotiations should not and cannot be ruled out. We understand why, after 2 frustrating years of negotiations, this I'm saying to the European Union, you would want this resolved. But this Parliament, our Parliament here, has only one duty: to represent the interests of the people of this country. And the deal negotiated by the government does not meet the needs of the people of this country. The people of Britain, including many European Union nationals who have made their lives here, these are people who have contributed to our country, have contributed to our economy and to our public services, including our National Health Service. And those people are now anxious and have no faith in this government to manage the process of settled status fairly or efficiently. And the early pilots of the scheme are very far from encouraging. The Prime Minister claimed that this is a good deal. And so confident was she of that she refused to publish the government's legal advice. But her government's own economic assessment clearly tells us it is a bad deal. It's a product, Mr. Speaker, of 2 years of botched negotiations, in which the government spent more time arguing with itself and in its own cabinet than it did in negotiating with the European Union. It's not only on Brexit that they have failed. Under this government, Mr. Speaker, more people are living in poverty, including... Mr. Speaker, I'm talking of the poverty of 500,000 more children who've been moved into poverty while this government's been in office. I'm also talking of those that have been forced into rough sleeping and homelessness, which has risen every year. Too many people are stuck in low-paid and insecure work. Too many people are struggling to make ends meet and falling deeper and deeper into personal debt on credit cards and loan sharks. Nothing in this Brexit deal and nothing on offer from this government will solve that. That is why Labour believes that a general election would be the best outcome for the country. If this deal is rejected tonight, we need, Mr. Speaker, to keep in mind that the vast majority of the people of this country don't think of themselves as Remainers or Leavers. Whether they voted Leave or Remain 2.5 years ago, they, all of them, are concerned about their future, and it's their concerns this House must be able to answer and meet. So, Mr. Speaker, I hope that tonight this House votes down this deal, and then we move to a general election. So the people, Mr. Speaker, so the people...
Order. Nobody's going to shout the right honourable gentleman down, just as nobody will shout the Prime Minister down. All they're doing, by causing me to intervene, is taking time away. Not necessary, rather foolish, thoroughly counterproductive. Jeremy Corbyn.
So, Mr. Speaker, the people need to be able to take back control, and a general election would give them the opportunity to decide who their MPs were, who their government was, and who was negotiating on their behalf. And it would give that new government a mandate, and the mandate that is needed to break the deadlock that has been brought to this House by this government. But first, Mr. Speaker, I ask this of the House. Vote against this deal. Vote against this deal because we've had a very long and very detailed debate in this House. More members have spoken in this debate than almost any other debate I can remember. They've given a heartfelt analysis of this deal, and a very large number have said why they will vote against this deal. Quite simply, Mr. Speaker, this deal is bad for our economy, a bad deal for our democracy, and a bad deal for this country. I ask the House tonight to do the right thing. Reject this deal. Reject this deal because of the harm it would do, and show that we as MPs are speaking up for the people that we represent, who recognise this deal is dangerous for this country and bad for them, their living standards, and for our collective future.
Mr. Speaker, this debate has lasted some 8 days, over 54 hours, with speeches of powerful sincerity from over 200 honourable and right honourable members. It has been historic for our Parliament and for our country. We have heard contributions from every perspective, looking at all aspects of this complex and vital question. We've seen this House at its most passionate and vigorous, and I thank everyone who has contributed. No one watching this debate can be in any doubt about the strength of this House of Commons as the fulcrum of our democracy. This is a debate about our economy and security, the livelihoods of our constituents, and the future for our children and for generations to come. It goes to the heart of our Constitution, and no one should forget that it is a democratic process that has got us to where we are today. In 2015, my party stood on an election manifesto that had as a centrepiece the promise of an in-out referendum on the UK's membership of the European Union. The British people responded by electing a Conservative government to follow through on that promise. That is what we did when this House voted overwhelmingly to hold the referendum and put the choice in the hands of the British people. Indeed, 470 current members voted in favour of it, and only 32 opposed it. That campaign was keenly fought. It caught the public imagination like few campaigns before it. Turnout was 72%, higher than for any national poll for a quarter of a century. And while not overwhelming, the result was clear and it was decisive. Something this House accepted when we voted overwhelmingly to trigger Article 50. 436 current members voted to do so, only 85 opposed. Parliament gave the people a choice. We set the clock ticking on our departure. And tonight, we will determine whether we move forward with a withdrawal agreement that honours the vote and sets us on course for a better future. The responsibility of each and every one of us at this moment is profound, for this is an historic decision that will set the future of our country for generations. So what are the alternatives that present themselves? First, we it's all too difficult and give up, either by revoking Article 50 or passing the back buck to the British people in a second referendum. But I believe we have a duty to deliver on the democratic decision of the British people, and to do so in a way that brings our country together. A second referendum would lead instead to further division. There'd be no agreement to the question, let alone the answer. It would say to the people we were elected to serve that we were unwilling to do what they had instructed. Now, the second possible outcome is that we leave on the 29th of March without a deal. But I don't believe that's what the British people voted for, because they were told that if they voted to leave, they could still expect a good trading relationship with the European Union. And neither would it be the best outcome. Our deal delivers certainty for businesses, with a time-limited implementation period to prepare for the new arrangements of the future relationship. No deal means no implementation period. Our deal protects the rights of EU citizens living in the UK and UK citizens living in the EU, so they can carry on their lives as before. No deal means no reciprocal agreement to protect those citizens' rights. Our deal delivers the deepest security partnership in the EU's history, so our police and security services can continue to work together with their European partners to keep all our people safe. No deal means no such security partnership. And our deal delivers the foundations for an unprecedented economic relationship with the EU that is more ambitious, that is...
I said earlier it was becoming really rather a noisy and unseemly atmosphere, and that has now resumed. It must stop. The Prime Minister must be heard. The Prime Minister.
Our deal delivers the foundations for an unprecedented economic relationship with the EU that is more ambitious than anything they have ever entered into with a third country. It will give us the benefits of trading with the European Union and the ability to forge new trade deals in our own right. No deal means those new trade deals come at the expense of a trade deal with Europe, not in addition to it. So while it is categorically wrong to suggest that our country could not ultimately make a success of no deal, It is equally wrong to suggest that this is the best outcome. Now, third, there is the path advocated by the Leader of the Opposition, and we've heard it again, of calling a general election. But today's vote is not about what's best for the Leader of the Opposition. It is about what is best for the country. And at the end of a general election, whatever the result, the choices facing us will not have changed. It will still be no Brexit, leaving with no deal, or leaving with a deal. And there's no guarantee that an election would make the parliamentary arithmetic any easier. All it would gain is 2 more months of uncertainty and division. In 2017, the two main parties both stood on manifestos that pledged to deliver the result of the referendum. They got over 80% of the vote. People had the opportunity to vote for a second referendum by supporting the Liberal Democrats in 2017. Just 7% of voters did so. It is the job of Parliament to deliver on the promises made at the last election, not to be seeking a new one. Now, some suggest there's a fourth option, to agree that we should leave with a deal on the 29th of March, but to vote this deal down in the hope of going back to Brussels again and negotiating an alternative deal. But no such alternative deal exists. The political declaration sets the framework for the future relationship, and the next phase of negotiations will be our chance to shape that relationship. But we cannot begin those talks unless or until we agree the terms of our withdrawal. And the European Union will not agree to any other deal for that withdrawal. So, having ruled out all of these options, we're left with one: to vote for this deal tonight. One that delivers on the core tenets of Brexit, taking back control of our borders, laws, money, trade and fisheries, but in a way that protects jobs, ensures our security and honours the integrity of our United Kingdom. One that strikes a fair balance between the hopes and desires of all our fellow citizens, those who voted to leave and those who voted to stay in. And if we leave with the deal I'm proposing, I believe we can lay the foundations from which to build a better Britain. And as Prime Minister, I would not stand at this dispatch box and recommend a course of action that I do not believe is in the best interests of our country and our future. And there are differences in this House today, but I believe we can come together as we go forwards. And let me reassure anyone who's in any doubt whatsoever, the government will work harder at taking Parliament with us. And as we move on to the next phase of negotiations, we will be looking to work with Parliament to seek that consensus. But, Mr. Speaker, let me turn to the most contentious element of our deal, the Northern Ireland Protocol.
My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, knows that what concerns many of us is the possibility of the permanent nature of the Northern Ireland backstop. May I refer her to my Amendment B on the order paper, which sets a deadline for that backstop, and may I ask her what is the attitude of the government to my amendment?
Can I thank my right honourable friend for the question he's asked and for the work that he has been doing to try to find a way through on this particular issue, and I know he's spent a long time consulting with international lawyers on this issue. The government isn't able to accept the amendment that has been selected, that my right honourable friend has put down, that has been selected tonight, because we have a different opinion and a different interpretation of the Vienna Convention. But I note that my right honourable friend has put down an alternative proposals in relation to this issue. The government is willing to look at creative solutions and will be happy to carry on working with my right honourable friend in relation to that particular issue. I said I would turn to the Northern Ireland.
Order. The House must calm itself. Zen. Restraint. Patience. Hear the Prime Minister.
I set out the government's position in detail in my statement yesterday, so I'm not going to go over it again. But the key thing to remember is this isn't a commitment we're making to the European Union. It's a commitment to the people of Northern Ireland and Ireland that they will be able to carry on living their lives as they do today. It's about saying that whatever happens when we leave the EU, we will honour the Belfast Agreement. Its success has been built on allowing people from both communities in Northern Ireland to feel that their identities are respected under the concerns of members who are determined that we do not undermine the strength of our United Kingdom. But it is not enough simply to make these assertions. We have to put in place arrangements that deliver those ends. And it's not just as simple as some would like it to be. So, as Prime Minister for the whole UK, it's my duty to provide a solution that works for the people of Northern Ireland. The answer lies in agreeing our future economic relationship, but we need an insurance policy to guarantee there will be no hard border if that future relationship is not in place by the end of the implementation period. I'll give way to the Leader of the Democratic Unionist Party.
Very, very grateful to the Prime Minister for giving way. And would she agree that whatever one's view on this withdrawal agreement and whatever arguments the people deploy, that we should not be using the peace or the political process in Northern Ireland as arguments for voting for this deal or voting against it? Would she agree that that is completely and utterly out of order? Make that clear to all of our Cabinet colleagues as well.
To the right honourable gentleman, I think everybody across this House is committed to ensuring that we maintain the arrangements of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, that we also ensure that we maintain the many benefits that have come from the peace process in Northern Ireland. And that should not be disrupted, and that should not be affected in any sense. But I also say that whatever future relationship is going to be negotiated or people want to see being negotiated, that insurance policy is essential. Any of the other proposals, Canada, Norway, any number of variations of those models, all of them require the insurance policy, and that is the so-called backstop. And no backstop simply means no deal now and for the foreseeable future. And I don't want to see anybody being able to exploit no deal and bringing doubt about the future of our union as a result of that. And let's remember, if I may say to this House, what the withdrawal agreement does deliver for the people of Northern Ireland. An implementation period, certainty for businesses. Protection of citizens' rights, certainty to thousands of families. No hard border, unfettered access to British and EU markets. Protection of the single electricity market across the island of Ireland, securing energy supply in Northern Ireland. Continued security cooperation with our European allies that the police service of Northern Ireland say is essential, and above all, the protection of the historic Belfast Good Friday Agreement. The deal we have puts our union first. Now, let me turn to the contribution of the Leader of the Opposition. Characteristic of his whole approach to Brexit, long on criticism and short on coherence. He's claimed that he'll be able to renegotiate the deal in a matter of weeks, get a drastically different outcome, and despite the European Union making clear that's impossible. But everything he does is designed to avoid taking any difficult decisions, saying one thing to one group and another thing to another. In the general election, he said in his manifesto, freedom of movement will end. On Sunday, he said, I'm not against the free movement of people. When asked about Brexit in a German newspaper, he said, we can't stop it. The referendum took place. Article 50 has been triggered. In his speech at Wakefield last week, and again this evening, he said a second referendum was an option on the table. He says Labour would run an independent trade policy, but he wants to join the customs union. He says he's opposed to no deal, but he says he's opposed to withdrawal agreement and the backstop without which there is no deal. So the question is, what is his position? Because he has failed in his responsibility to provide a credible alternative to the government of the day by pursuing from the start a cynical course designed to serve his own political interest and not the national interest. He has forfeited the right to demand loyalty from those of his MPs who take a more pragmatic view, because he doesn't care whether we leave or not, with a deal or not, as long as he can maximise disruption and uncertainty and the likelihood of a general election. And I hope that members opposite, who faithfully pledged to their constituents that they would respect the result of the referendum, that they think carefully before voting against a deal which delivers Brexit. And I hope that those who fear leaving without a deal, whose constituents rely on manufacturing jobs, think very carefully about rejecting a deal that is the only guaranteed way to take no deal off the table. Mr. Speaker, this is the most significant vote that any of us will ever be part of in our political careers. After all the debate, all the disagreement, all the division, the time has now come for all of us in this House to make a decision. A decision that will define our country for decades to come. A decision that will determine the future for our constituents, their children and their grandchildren. A decision that each of us will have to justify and live with for many years to come. We know the consequences of voting for this deal. They are laid out in black and white in the pages of the withdrawal agreement. But no one who votes against this deal will be able to tell their constituents what real-world outcome they voted for, because a vote against this deal is a vote for nothing more than uncertainty, division, and the very real risk of no deal.
I'm very grateful for the Prime Minister for giving way. Prime Minister, on any of the analysis of Brexit, economic growth will be lower than staying in the European Union. Will the Prime Minister not realise, on the basis of the knowledge and on the fact that people are going to lose opportunities as a consequence of Brexit, the alternative is to extend Article 50, go back, give the people the say. Let's act in all our interests on the basis of the information that we now have.
I say to the right honourable gentleman, Parliament gave the British people a choice. Parliament, the government of the time, all parties, all those campaigning in that referendum were absolutely clear that whatever the decision of that referendum, it would be respected by government and by Parliament. And I believe that we have a duty to deliver on that referendum vote, and to do so in a way that does protect people's jobs and protects our security and protects our union. A vote against this deal is a vote for nothing more than uncertainty, division, and the very real risk of no deal or no Brexit at all. And it doesn't have to be that way. Tonight we can choose certainty over uncertainty. We can choose unity over division. We can choose to deliver on our promise to the British people, not break that promise and endanger trust in politics for a generation. Because as members of Parliament, we have a duty to serve not our own self-interest nor that of our parties, but the people we were elected to represent. It is the people of this country that we were sent here to serve. The people of this country who queued up at polling stations, who cast their ballots so they might put their faith in us. It is the people of this country who entrusted us with the sacred right to build for them and their children and grandchildren the brighter future they expect and deserve. And if we act in the national interest and back this deal tonight, then tomorrow we can begin to build that future together. If we act in the national interest and back this deal tonight, we can build a country that works for everyone. Together we can show the people we serve that their voices have been heard, that their trust was not misplaced, that our politics can and does deliver, that politicians can rise above our differences and come together to do what the people asked of us. That is the test history has set for us today. It will determine the future of our country for generations. We each have a solemn responsibility to deliver Brexit and take this country forward. And with my whole heart, I call on this House to discharge that responsibility together, and I commend this motion to the House.
Under the order of the House of the 4th of December and the 9th of January, I must now put the questions necessary to dispose of proceedings on the European Union withdrawal motion. As I explained the sequence earlier, it should now be familiar to colleagues. I begin by inviting Jeremy Corbyn, the Leader of the Opposition, to move Amendment A.
Mr. Speaker.
Not moved. I turn now to the second of the amendments, that in the name of the Leader of the Scottish National Party, Mr. Ian Blackford, Amendment K.
Not moved, Mr. Speaker.
Moved. Thank you. I turn to the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Gainsborough, to move, if he so wishes, Amendment B.
In view of the positive response from the PM, not moved.
Moved. Very well. And finally, I invite Mr. John Barron to move Amendment F.
I beg to move.
The question is that the amendment in the name of the Honourable Gentleman and of others, Amendment F, be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the noes have it. No? Is the Honourable Gentleman persisting? No? Persistence in order. I know what I'm doing. The key point is persistence. If the Honourable If the Honourable Gentleman wishes to press his amendment, he is entitled to do so. Oh, yes, he is. Oh, yes, he is. I'll be the judge of that. The question is that the amendment be made. I'll say it once more. As many as other have been, say aye. Of the contrary, no. Clear the lobby.
Good evening and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland's special programme on Brexit. You will just have seen there in the Parliament that the votes have just started. So the process today was that 14 amendments were put forward and the Speaker decided to provisionally accept 4 of them. What we've just seen happened is the first 3 votes were not moved, which has now left that the final amendment from John Barron has been moved and the Parliament are now going to be voting on that as we speak. I'm joined this evening by Day Tucker. Welcome, Day. And we're just going to have a talk about what's been happening. I think it was a surprise there that all these motions weren't moved. Obviously, the people in Parliament must know stuff that we don't know.
Yeah, or they had planned it beforehand.
Maybe, yeah. It just seems. So really, what's going to happen is this first vote will be voted on, and then it will go to Theresa May's main deal, and that I'm wondering if that feels like an indication that she's going to get a deal through.
Oh yes, yes. It just feels like we're being played. There are things going on in the background that voters don't know about, and it's a game amongst the politicians of all parties.
Well, we heard earlier on in Corbyn's speech, he was trying to tell us that Theresa May's deal was a bad deal, that it would cause harm, it was dangerous for the country. But it begs the question, his alternative is not to stop it altogether anyway.
Yeah.
So it seems bizarre that that's the tax that he's taken.
Yes.
When he could have the opportunity to actually put a halt in this, either people's vote, general election, put it to the country and say, if I'm in charge, we'll stop all this nonsense now and we'll have a clean slate. It seems strange that he's not.
Is it not all to do with these weird parliamentary procedures? And he's frightened to put it to the vote in case he doesn't get, therefore he's going to lose out anyway.
Yeah. But I mean, in general, if he was talking to the public, he's not given the public any alternative really to Brexit. We've taken 2 years to get to this point, and he thinks that he could still do Brexit but renegotiate between now and March for a completely different deal. I mean, I'm not sure that's realistic.
I don't think it's realistic either. And even Theresa May has been told that there will be no further negotiations. Well, we're told that the EU will always take it to the wire. Perhaps they will this time, but I really don't. I think they're all fed up with us.
Yeah. Well, I think it's easy to blame the EU for what's not happening within this deal, but if you look at it from their point of view, they are 27 nations who are looking out for their own agenda, if you like,
yes.
Which is kind of what you would expect them to do under the circumstances.
Yes.
And I suppose the danger is that if the EU offered the UK special circumstances in some way, then potentially you've got another 27 countries that are going to say, oh well.
The domino effect.
Yeah.
Yes. That has always been the danger, and we were alerted to that right at the start. So you'd think with that knowledge that Theresa May might have gone into negotiations using a slightly different tactic. But no, she hasn't. But I mean, I've been told by several people, when she was first elected, she is not a team player. She only communicates with a very few close cohorted friends. And here it is all playing out because she's not inclusive, not even in terms of her cabinet. So, why would she be inclusive in terms of reaching across the party? She won't be.
Yeah. I think some can argue that the behaviour's been a bit arrogant in as much as up until this point in history, the British Empire has always gone everywhere else as the bigger body. They have gone and they have instructed what's going to happen. They've taken control, they've done whatever. But this time, they're the small fry within this big organisation that they're trying to negotiate, and I'm not sure they've ever known how to be in that position.
No.
So they kind of almost started from the wrong foot.
Yes, but I think that goes way back in that when Britain entered the EU in the first place, the Commonwealth was fragmenting and all the colonies were fragmenting and they were getting independence, unlike poor Scotland. But anyway, they got their independence. So they became more and more insignificant. And they just, like Theresa May, they have not been team players. They've always been in the past at the head of the game until they became less competent or people became more competent and said, look, hang on, we can't go on like this. So their power has got smaller and smaller, and they've not really addressed the reasons why. They could have, brought people around them and worked with them, but no, they just ignored it and tried to pretend that they were something that they no longer are.
Yeah. Do you think as well that the narrative we've seen about leaving the EU, and a lot of that has been based around migrants and immigration and that sort of rhetoric, but do you think that there's too many people who either don't know or have forgotten why we joined the EU in the first place?
When you say too many people, you're talking the
voters.
Voters?
Yeah,
oh,
ordinary
absolutely,
people.
Yes.
I mean, there's a whole generation out there, a couple of generations that are voters,
yes,
that won't they weren't around when it happened, so they won't remember
No.
pre-being in the EU.
Yes.
And
Or
then-
indeed why you joined the EU.
And if all your decision making is based on what's in the mainstream media, then you're kind of not getting a proper view
Yes.
or the proper information really to make that informed choice.
Yes. That's absolutely the case. And we're not educated in the schools as to how the EU works, what its role is, even what our own Parliament's role is. The schools are failing the people, but then maybe that's the agenda. You know, if you keep people in ignorance, you've got a lot more control over them.
Yeah. We saw Theresa's speech just before we went to the votes there, and she was trying to tell us that her deal is all about the economy and the security of the country, and stressed that it was the democratic process, that they had it on their election manifesto, which allowed them to carry out this. She was trying to tell us what the benefits were, although she didn't actually tell us what the benefits were, and reiterated that a no deal, whilst could be managed, was her words, is not the preferred option. And then went down to say that a general election, obviously, which is what Corbyn's calling for, would cause even more uncertainty, which again I think is a bit ironic. I'm not sure we could have any more uncertainty. And then come out with the usual things of taking back control. And she accused Corbyn of trying to maximise disruption.
Yes.
I mean, it feels like a lot of this stuff, between the two of them, it's just words.
Yes. Absolutely.
Meaningless words. There's not a lot behind the words and the rhetoric, and which is a real danger for the democratic process.
Well, the democratic process has been let down by the descent of politicians into this culture of lying with impunity. And even the press are now beginning to clock that certain things that are being said, for instance, the last speech that she made, where she said that the UK had a good record on referendums and following it up and respecting it, etc., forgetting that that actually wasn't the case with the Welsh referendum or the Scottish referendum. But people nowadays know what happened then. It didn't happen that many years ago that people have forgotten. So it's the lies that I find hard to bear.
And it seems that these lies are not held to account. They're not. No. And actually, the more wrongdoing that happens, and I think a really good example of this is this seaborne ferry contract stuff. You know, the government awards a contract to an organisation that doesn't have any boats, and it doesn't matter. I think, is that us going back? We're going back to Parliament now, because I think that's the result of the first vote in. And I think, Day, that this process of voting in the first place is just so outdated and ridiculous. I mean, it's on average about 20 minutes per vote. There isn't enough seats in the whole of that chamber for all the MPs for a start, which begs the question of democracy in the first place. If you can't even have a seat in your own parliament that you're elected to. But it just seems, ridiculous that we've not even. I mean, all these MPs are issued with iPads, So there's obviously huge security on the iPad, so there's no reason why that couldn't be a voting system at the same time. You could be sitting there and voting instantly.
Yeah, but there is a reason. It's just that it's a museum.
Yeah.
You know, it's and heritage has trumped common sense.
Yeah, no.
The protection of a heritage.
And we saw that recently when I can't remember who the MP was that went and lifted the mace.
Yes.
And there was more of an outcry about that than there was the fact that we're heading off a cliff with Brexit.
Yes, yes.
And you find it quite bizarre that
really bizarre. Yes.
that can happen.
Yes.
I
remember when we were being trained as rural leaders, and we were taken to Brussels to the Parliament there and watched the proceedings. And in fact, we saw Baroness, I can't remember her name, but she was the British lady who was sworn in as a commissioner. And we watched all that, and we watched them placing votes and what have you. And then we went to Holyrood, and we saw the same sort of thing, the procedures, and they pressed a button to vote. And it was all just neat, tidy, quick, efficient. And then we went to Westminster, and we were shown up a wee rickety back stair to a room that didn't fit all of us. And the gentleman who was looking after us and sponsoring us, I think that's the phrase they used, he sponsored us. He told us at the time, he said, it's like a three-legged stool. You've got Westminster, you've got Holyrood and Brussels. He said, you can forget Westminster. They've not got the power. We really need to focus on Brussels and Holyrood. And if you want to influence, you work with those MEPs and your MSPs. And funnily enough, throughout all those years, at the time I had a Labour MP, who was a lovely MP, but always voted the party line. And it didn't matter what we wanted, what we tried to persuade otherwise, she voted with the party line. And now we've got a Tory one, and it's exactly the same, but worse.
Yeah. Well, I think, from the point of view, it's the situation is obviously different in Scotland. Scotland overwhelmingly voted to remain. So the problem is that Westminster's rhetoric is it was a UK-wide vote. It wasn't, and that's very convenient for them. But
that comes back to the democratic deficit, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The fact that we are 4 different countries or regions, as whatever you call them, but the ratio of the different, numbers of voters in each country isn't accounted for. And it just isn't democratic, because English votes will always win because it's a numbers game.
And obviously we see the Boundary Commission review that's going on at the moment. So potentially at the next general election, as long as there's not a snap one, the borders, the constituents will change again. And actually Scotland gets less MPs yet again, and I think so does Ireland and probably Northern Ireland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
So it's going to increase the democratic deficit.
And again, they just seem to get away with changing the goalposts. I mean, we've seen manipulation of constituencies for decades now, and they just continue to manipulate that for the benefit of Westminster, not for the benefit of constituents or the voters, and it can be really frustrating. When they can get away with that. Well, at least it looks as if nearly everybody's through and back in. I think there's 2 of the tailors up at the front already, so it shouldn't be.
But I mean, how outdated is this
system?
Procedure?
I know. And I think this is another thing that's caused a few issues in terms of the Speaker's role, and Berco's very precious about his systems, but we're in uncharted territory. This has never happened before. So, and I think one of the guests that were here on Sunday was talking about the Parliament setting precedents, and the problem is we don't have anything to fall back on, and he's kind of trying to be fair to him, trying to make sure that the process is fair, and certainly some of the Conservatives are not too happy about what's been happening. But I think it's a difficult job to try and navigate your way through this when we don't know.
I seem to remember when he was appointed, there was a huge hoo-ha within the Conservative Party. They didn't want him. They probably knew that he was going to try and be a reformer.
Yeah. Well, my understanding is, since he came on as the Speaker, that he certainly has tried to be more fair across the chamber.
Yes.
He tries to let people in, and there's a matrix for who speaks first, and how that goes down. And I mean, you could be in the chamber for 6-7 hours and never get called to speak. But he does try to make sure, specifically the kind of main three parties and all the rest of them as well get a chance to speak. And apparently that didn't happen before. It was literally the Speaker decided who was going to speak. And that was it. And quite often, the smaller parties would know it, which again, that's not democratic. Because the reality is that every single person in that chamber there has been voted in to do their job, and I think Theresa alluded to it earlier on, that this is the most significant vote they'll probably ever take in their parliamentary career, and it's true.
Right.
But you just wonder what's going through some of their minds. In terms of, do some of them actually really understand what the implications of Brexit are going to be, whether it's this deal or it's no deal?
I don't believe they do. I really don't. After all, they're just ordinary human beings. And I know, even from dealing with my own MSPs, they're always looking to us to give them information, because they aren't experts in everything. But they're honest about it, and they look to us to get the information. Whereas I'm not so sure that that's quite as is what happens down south. Maybe I'm wrong. I'd like to think I was, but from what some of them are talking about, you think, where did you get that information from?
I mean, it's even some of the stuff that's going on with the universal credit, and we spoke about it on Sunday in the show. The I, Daniel Blake film was on television on Monday, and even now the Tories are still saying it's a story and there's no real truth to it. And we spoke about it on Sunday, and my question was, well, do they not have casework? But in some cases, some of these Tory MPs will come from very rich constituencies where unemployment is incredibly low, so they probably don't have the same casework as other MPs, which means that they are not getting exposed to the trauma that this system is causing people. And that's a worry. As you say, I think one of the main things about being an MP is you have to be open to finding out the information, because you don't know everything, you don't know all the information, and whilst you have
Order! The ayes to the right were 24. The noes to the left were 600.
The ayes to the right, 24. The noes to the left, 600. So the noes have it, the noes have it. Unlock. Thank you.
One more heave.
Order. I now put the main question to the House. The main question in the name of the Prime Minister. The question is the main motion in the name of the Prime Minister. As many as are opinion say aye. 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 Of the contrary, no. Division! Clear the lobby.
So that motion has fallen there, and that was the one for John Barron, which was asking the asking to be passed that says that UK must be given explicit power to terminate the backstop without the permission of the EU. So it's not really a surprise that everybody voted against that. So now we will go to the main motion, which is Theresa May's deal. And we'll see what the outcome of that is. But it's interesting, and he was shouting, unlock there and stuff, and it just what we were talking about earlier on, that whole process. You go through the chambers, and then the doors are just locked. Yes. And you can't. The people stand there to stop you. Doorkeepers stand there to stop you getting through, and they won't. And you have somebody sitting in that chamber with a sword, and the whole thing just seems.
I watched Mary Black's video of the procedures,
and it's incredible.
I mean, my daughter and she passed it round all her young friends as well, and they were absolutely in cahoots about it. Not cahoots, giggling about it. They've never seen anything like it. And when the camera went up to how much they were getting for wasting all this time, and you think, it's indefensible.
Yeah, but I think what's really interesting is, and I'm not sure that Westminster are completely aware of this, but obviously since the referendum in Scotland there's been much more engagement, people are much more switched on, and although it could be argued that people are fed up with referendums and general elections and voting and whatever, I still think there is a level of engagement that isn't in the rest of the country or countries.
Informed engagement.
Yes, absolutely. And I don't think that they realise that there is many people in Scotland who, we're going back to the vote. All right, that was quick.
Wendy Morton and Ian Stewart. Tellers for the nose, Vicky Foxcroft and Nick Smith.
No, he's just announcing the tellers. Okay. No, it was he was just announcing who the tellers are for the two parties. But I think in terms of they don't appreciate the number of people who are probably watching what's going on here.
Yes.
I mean, actually, it would be interesting to see the viewing figures, because I think there'll be a lot of people in Scotland switched on to this. Maybe not so much in England, because I don't think they have that informed decision. They do think Brexit's the best thing that's going to happen to them, and probably don't realise. Some of them, but when you see the polls and stuff, it doesn't. People's opinions don't seem to have changed, and I think they worry that things like the army in the streets and stockpiling food and medications is just a scare tactic from the kind of opposition parties to Brexit, and so they're just ignoring potentially that possibility.
Some of them are. Have the polls not veered towards Remain, though?
Yeah, there has definitely been a swing. But there's a train of thought that even if we had a people's vote, that it might not actually change the outcome, and it might
because it needs that bigger swing to make it much more credible and acceptable, and it's the narrowness of the win that is causing so much of the problem. Actually, not that much different from our own Scottish referendum. It wasn't that big a win for them.
No, absolutely.
Which is why the Yes movement is buoyed, ready to just go in a much more focused way, a much more professional way, I think, than they did the last time.
What's your thoughts then, Day, of regardless of the outcome, whether it's or it's voted down, because then it'll have to go back to Parliament, but what's your thoughts on what the impact on Scotland that's going to be? Do you think we're going to see a referendum, or is it going to be a number of months till we see what happens, or what's your thoughts?
I honestly don't know. I don't think, whatever the outcome, I don't think it'll change the forward momentum towards a referendum in Scotland, another referendum, because Scottish people have seen what has happened. And there's no doubt that it's been a shock to an awful lot of people who believed what they were told in 2014. And everything has been proven wrong. They've been cheated, they've been lied to, they've been let down, and they see through an awful lot of these false promises that were made. And I don't think that they'll allow that to happen again.
In terms of Brexit, there's much debate around the cost of Brexit for the UK and what the long-term costs are, which actually nobody really knows. And obviously the EU want the UK to settle any of its outstanding bills before it leaves. And as I say, really nobody knows exactly what that figure is. But it potentially it could include pension payments to EU officials, costs for relocating London-based EU agencies back into Europe, outstanding EU budget commitments, etc. And obviously that comes under the so-called divorce bill, and there's even a chain of people saying, well, we just walk away and we don't pay, which is a real worry that somebody would think that was an alternative.
Yes, and it's not just ordinary voters, Brexit voters that are saying that. It's some of her cabinet have actually said that. And given what we were told when I think Alex Salmond suggested that we may not have to pay anything because it wasn't us who incurred the debt, the British debt or the UK debt, there was a huge furore from the Better Together campaign. Oh, you can't do that. Nobody will ever trust you again. Nobody will do business with you again. And yet now they're saying, yeah, we can do it, as if they think that we don't remember these things that were said to us.
And obviously one of the other things that they're muting about is the possible compromise of spreading the cost over several years. What a legacy that's going to be to any future governments. It's kind of a bit like the PFI, it's like, yeah, that's okay, we'll do the best deal the now, but it really doesn't matter.
Shunt it on to the next generation.
It doesn't matter what the future holds. I mean, I think it's a shocking way to behave.
Yes, but was it Milton Friedman who said that OPM, which is the abbreviation of other people's money, operates in a parallel universe and bears no comparison to the money that you've got in your pocket that you've earned.
And if there's no agreement, if there's no deal, and that's what the outcome of this is, and then we end up with no agreement on trade, and we operate within, that would leave us operating within the EU under the WTO rules, which would basically mean custom checks and tariffs and goods, as well as border checks for travellers. That seems
crazy.
Quite a worry.
Yeah. So you've got the practical on the one side with the customs checks and all the paperwork and actual physical checking that entails, and then on the other side you've got the actual tariffs. And in my case, lamb, the WTO tariff, I believe, is 40%.
Wow.
So, and beef, I think, is more. But it's not good. It's not good. And certainly, if that was to be the case, then we are absolutely gubbed in Scotland, because in fact, the UK produces, I think, the most lamb in the whole of the EU. And the only competitors we have really are the New Zealand lamb. And it's hard to compete with a country who actually supports their farmers. Okay, they don't give them subsidies, but there's many a different way of producing support for your farmers without calling it a direct subsidy.
And I mean, obviously that must be incredibly worrying for businesses, because the reality is nobody has the answers. We don't have the answers because we don't know what's going to happen here. It's a complete unknown, and you can't run a business on a complete unknown, because part of good governance is preparing for the future, thinking about what you want or you need to do. And it must be an incredibly difficult time for business, particularly small businesses as well, that are in food production. And you kind of wonder what that's going to look like for them going forward.
Because whether it's a small business or a large business, the same effects are there. You know, okay, for the small business you might say, well, they're only going to lose a certain amount of money. But the impact of that small amount of money can be as hard on that business as losing a large amount of money on a big business.
But I think what I was trying to get at was that a big business has probably got more of a cushion. That,
you think?
That they can maybe, if they've got a wee bit behind them, they can maybe last that bit longer. Whereas often a small business is going from invoice to invoice, and you know, and if that money's not coming in, or it's costing money and people aren't buying their produce.
Yeah, I think though there are an awful lot of businesses that are living just in time, and you know, you've heard them talking about these goods that are travelling just in time. You know, it's only going to hold, you know, one lot being held up, and then you've got no product to sell. It's like the farms that have to have their cattle slaughtered because they've come up positive with a TB test. Well, you know, that could be a whole year's income gone. Like our hill farmers with this last winter that we had, and I know several of them who had no lambs at all this year, and that's their one form of income, other than the money, the support money that they get from the EU. So it's, you know, and people will say, oh, well, they can't be very efficient. But, you know, that is where they are. They farm on hard ground. The island boys, that cost them £80 more to import straw and hay and stuff over to the island than it does for me to get straw and hay, because I can get it direct from the Cars of Stirling, half an hour away.
So all that adds up.
Everybody's different, yes.
And I think that probably highlights it, is that it's such a complex situation. One thing doesn't fit all, and it's really difficult to manage how that's going to work in practice across the board. Because it's and obviously some of the, you know, the implications of no deal are things like what would happen to Britain's position as a global financial centre. And I find it strange that, you know, London's don't appear to be that concerned about what's going to happen if they crash out with a no deal. And obviously the big one is the border in Ireland. And we saw John's amendment earlier on. It was just wanting to say, well, we don't need to get permission for MD. We can just terminate a black shop when we want it. And again, that highlights to me a real lack of understanding of the situation.
Well, it does.
Over there. And, you know, you just wonder what their idea is.
But the British politician has never understood Ireland. They've never got close to it. I mean, only recently the BBC put on a programme about, was it the Ballymurphy murders? I'd never heard of that. And when I was of an age when we were having all the bombings going on, the impression I got through the BBC was that the IRA were really bad, and I thought, well, hang on a minute, we came over there to help you because the other guys, the police force, were being horrid to you, and now you're turning on the Irish, on our soldiers. But the Ballymurphy murder programme showed us a completely different story, and probably the truth of what actually went on.
I mean, I think what is getting more and more highlighted to us is just about this mainstream media impact and rhetoric, and how you are fed what agenda they want you to have. And there's a spin on everything, and I find it quite interesting that people will often still say to me that journalists can't write stuff that's not true, but they can write a version of things. Absolutely. And they've got very clever of putting a spin on something, or a story about a story, or you know, getting a kind of subtle message out there that they seem you know, able to do.
That's right.
But I think the ironic, I think this is us going back now for the vote.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432.
202. The noes. Order! The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlocked. On a point of order. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the House has spoken and the government will listen. It is clear that the House does not support this deal, but tonight's vote tells us nothing about what it does support. Nothing about how or even if it intends to honour the decision the British people took in a referendum Parliament decided to hold. And people, particularly EU citizens who've made their home here, and UK citizens living in the EU, deserve clarity on these questions as soon as possible.
Order! There's no good people shouting. There will be an opportunity for other points of order, but the Prime Minister must and will be heard. The Prime Minister.
Those whose jobs rely on our trade with the EU need that clarity. So, with your permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to set out briefly how the government intends to proceed. First, we need to confirm whether this government still enjoys the confidence of the House. I believe that it does, but given the scale and importance of tonight's vote, it's right that others have the chance to test that question if they wish to do so. I can therefore confirm that if the official opposition table a confidence motion this evening in the form required by the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, the government will make time to debate that motion tomorrow. And if, as happened before Christmas, the official opposition decline to do so, we will, on this occasion, consider making time tomorrow to debate any motion in the form required from the other opposition parties, should they put one forward. Second, if the House confirms its confidence in this government, I will then hold meetings with my colleagues, our confidence and supply partner, the DUP, and senior parliamentarians from across the House to identify what would be required to secure the backing of the House. The government will approach these meetings in a constructive spirit, but given the urgent need to make progress, we must focus on ideas that are genuinely negotiable and have sufficient support in this House. Third, if these meetings yield such ideas, the government will then explore them with the European Union. Mr. Speaker, I want to end by offering two reassurances. The first is to those who fear that the government's strategy is to run down the clock to the 29th of March. That is not our strategy. I've always believed that the best way forward is to leave in an orderly way with a good deal, and have devoted much of the last 2 years negotiating such a deal. As you confirmed, Mr. Speaker, the amendment to the business motion tabled last week by my right honourable and learned friend, the member for Beaconsfield, is not legally binding, but the government respects the will of the House. We will therefore make a statement about the way forward and table an amendable motion by Monday. The second reassurance is to the British people who voted to leave the European Union in the referendum 2.5 years ago. I became Prime Minister immediately after that referendum. I believe it's my duty to deliver on their instruction, and I intend to do so. Every day that passes without this issue being resolved means more uncertainty, more bitterness and more rancour. The government has heard what the House has said tonight, but I ask members on all sides of the House to listen to the British people who want this issue settled, and to work with the government to do just that.
I will come to other colleagues, but first of all, point of order, the Leader of the Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The result of tonight's vote is the greatest defeat for a government since the 1920s in this House. This is a catastrophic defeat for this government. After 2 years of failed negotiations, the House of Commons has delivered its verdict on her Brexit deal, and that verdict is absolutely decisive. I hear the words of the Prime Minister, but actions of her government of the past 2 years speak equally clearly. She is only attempting to reach out now to try to keep her failed process and deal alive after it's been so roundly rejected by Parliament on behalf of the people of this country. Labour has laid out our priorities consistently. No deal No deal must be taken. No deal must be taken off the table. A permanent customs union must be secured, and people's rights and protections must be guaranteed so they do not fall behind. At every turn, the Prime Minister has closed the door on dialogue. Businesses begged her to negotiate a comprehensive customs union. Trade union leaders pressed her for the same thing. They were ignored. In the last 2 years, she's only had one priority: the Conservative Party. Her governing principle of delay and denial has reached the end of the line. She cannot seriously believe that after 2 years of failure, she is capable of negotiating a good deal for the people of this country. The most important issue facing us is that the government has lost the confidence of this House and this country. I therefore, Mr. Speaker, inform you I have now tabled a motion of no confidence in this government. And I'm pleased that motion will be debated tomorrow, so this House can give its verdict on the sheer incompetence of this government and pass that motion of no confidence in the government.
First of all, just come to the leader. I will come to the right honourable gentleman, of course, but a point of order, the Leader of the House.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I should like to make a short business statement regarding the business for tomorrow and the remainder of this week.
I'm extraordinarily grateful to the right honourable lady, and I accept that she can't be psychic as to what I'm thinking, and I can't be psychic as to what she's thinking. I think the smooth and orderly way to proceed with this matter is to deal with points of order first, and then to come to the right honourable lady's statement, which would be entirely proper and doubtless helpful to the House. Point of order, Mr. Ian Blackford.
Mr. Speaker, we should be aware of the situation that we're in. The clock is ticking. We have got very little time to resolve this. The fact that it has taken us so long to get to this point, frankly, is shameful. This is a humiliating defeat for the government. When I listen to the Prime Minister, it sounds like everybody else is at fault rather than her. She has to accept responsibility for what has happened this evening. Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted that the Leader of the Opposition has come round to a motion of no confidence. This should have happened before, but of course we will support it. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned, it is clear the clock is ticking. The government needs to secure the safety of all our nations and should immediately postpone the Article 50 process and should immediately have talks with all the leaders of the opposition parties. Let's work together in all our interests, but let's listen to the voices of the parliamentarians that have been sent here. There is no support for this deal. It mustn't come back again. The obvious thing to do, the right thing to do, suspend Article 50, put this to the people and a people's vote.
I know the right honourable gentleman won't take offence when I say he was using the device of a point of order, as is entirely understandable in these circumstances, to say what he wanted to say, but he was more interested in what he had to say to the House than in anything that I might have to say to him. It's not a matter for the Chair. The right honourable gentleman has registered his view, and these are the sorts of issues that can quite properly be aired in debate and quite conceivably in discussions that take place with the Prime Minister and other party leaders. But he's made his point with force and alacrity, and it's on the record for colleagues to study. I will take the honourable lady first, right honourable lady first, and then others. Point of order, Jo Swinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With this result of a scale that is unprecedented in recent times, it is clear that this deal, nor any tweaks to it, will get through the House of...
We have the result there was that the ayes were 202 and the noes were 432. Now, Theresa May's reaction there, she appeared to be challenging Corbyn to a confidence motion and said that she would be happy to debate that or any other motion brought forward by opposition parties tomorrow. And then it kind of felt a bit like, I think you said, Dave, that she was calling his bluff there. She also said that she would hold meetings with MPs across the House to identify what was required to get this through. That is just too little, too late.
Too late.
We've been 2 years.
Yeah.
You'd think you know, if she really wanted to get this through the Parliament, that we should have been doing that working together stuff way before tonight.
Yes.
It's a pretty damning situation, I think she's in.
But if you looked at how she's treated the other 3 regions, countries, and Mike Russell and the others, it's just par for the course. She doesn't work with other people. She's like a headmistress who's, you know, it's my way or the highway.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, I think part of that bravado at the beginning was a bit of not losing face, and she said that there would be a statement coming back to the Commons on Monday. But she finished by reassuring the British people that she will deliver on the referendum. So whilst there's talk of let's get together and see how we can make this work, in the same breath she's saying, you know, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
So then obviously we saw Corbyn coming in, and he reiterated that this is the greatest defeat for the government since the 1920s, and he called her out for only reaching out now, which is what we've said, you know, after all this time. And he confirmed that he will be tabling a no confidence motion tomorrow. And because Ian Blackford would probably not have been called for his thoughts on it, because that's not the parliamentary process, he used the process of a point of order to be able to get in there and say what he was thinking. And he highlighted that the clock is ticking, and it absolutely is. We are running out of time here. And he said that he was disappointed that it's taken so long to get to this point, which is kind of what we were saying. He talked about it being a humiliating defeat, and he said that Theresa May needs to accept I think it was accept the MPs that were in the House to do their job. And he was proposing that Article 50 process is halted or extended, and was asking to work together, and he called for a people's vote. What are you thinking about what's just happened there, Dave?
It's evidence that the SNP MPs decided some time ago that if you can't beat them, join them. And this is in terms of using the parliamentary procedures that you know, I just find anathema. But if that's the way they're going to play the game, then the SNP decided some time ago that's exactly what they would do. And they've been very successful at doing that. And here's another classic case of him using the parliamentary procedures to be able to stand up and say what, you know, the opposition leader should have been saying a long time ago. But he was able to, because let's face it, the SNP have been the effective opposition all these years when Labour have just sat in their thumbs and abstained and abstained and abstained.
I know, I mean, it does seem a bit ironic that Corbyn's, you know, calling for all this now, when actually, I mean, what was it, 3-4 weeks ago, he did a no confidence motion in Theresa May and lost that. You know, it was like he had the opportunity then, which would have been 3 or 4 weeks ago, and, you know, again, that with the clock ticking, that is just leaving us less and less time. And I suppose, you know, people kind of say, why is it taking so long to get to this point? But when you think about it, you know, you're unpicking 43 years of treaties and agreements. And that's covering thousands of different subjects. So it was never, ever going to be straightforward. So I suppose the worry is that with the little time we've got left, and as I think you said earlier on, Dave, the EU's made it perfectly clear, they've come as far as they can go. They've said, here's what we're proposing, this is what we'll agree to. So I'm not sure what can change within the next couple of weeks.
Well, the people's vote. If it's a wide enough gap. But that's the danger. And I think an awful lot of people are terrified that it actually won't be any wider. But I can't, you know, I've got a bit more faith in human nature, and I think that the English voters have been more educated in recent times, and it has been in very recent times, but they're now a lot more aware as to the consequences of the different things that have been proposed. And certainly, you know, I'm a great Twitter buff, and from what I'm seeing on Twitter, we saw, months and months ago, we started to get tweets of English people saying, can I come up to live in Scotland? You know, now that never used to happen. That didn't happen last year. This is only very recent. And they're full of admiration for what the SNP are trying to do and bring some common sense to bear.
Well, those in the north of England are asking for the border to be lowered so as that they can. But I think equally though, you know, there's all this stuff going on, this right-wing rhetoric that's going on down south in these yellow vest protests and stuff, and they're not being reported up here in the news. We are seeing it through Twitter and social media, but we're not, again, you know, the media's doing their own agenda, and they're not telling us what's happening down there. And I think, you know, that kind of ugliness, first of all, you know, this idea of that you can abuse both, you know, verbally and physically MPs of any party's wrong, because nobody that's elected should have to suffer any kind of abuse. But it's this, you know, idea of what's been happening the last few months with normalising this right-wing rhetoric, and it's like, you know, again, everything's either immigrants' faults or it's benefits grinders. It's all these labels they label people. And what would worry me in a people's vote is there a significant amount of people that have changed their mind in England that would make that result different next time round?
It would be one heck of a gamble. I think if there was a way that the parties could agree to look at redesigning the democratic deficit that exists at the moment to make it fairer, and that would mean, I suppose, one or two UKIP MPs, but, you know, is that a bad thing? You know, if we've got a wider breadth of views, people standing for other people's views, then it might diffuse the polarity that is going on in politics at the moment.
But I mean, you know, the UKIP party are...
They've got worse.
They're in a disaster, really, area, because, you know, all their main people, I mean, one of their leaders lasted, 11 days or something.
That's right.
I mean, they don't seem to be able to agree on anything within the party and pull that together. But I think, you know, do you think that one of the reasons Theresa May is so against a second vote in a referendum is because of the rhetoric that the establishment put out about a second referendum for Scotland? So almost if she says, because remember that was we had to, it was a once in a lifetime, and you had to accept the respect the vote is what they keep saying, and they say that in Parliament almost on a daily basis. So obviously if they allowed a second people's vote referendum, then that would leave an opening
legitimise a Scottish one.
So do you think that's part of our worry?
Undoubtedly, I think that is part of it.
And she also says that a people's vote would be an undemocratic breach of trust, which I think is a bit ironic, given that, you know, they asked people to vote on a referendum with giving them very little information other than something on the side of a bus that wasn't even true.
Exactly.
You know, it's you kind of wonder what they're... I mean, they were lied to.
Absolutely.
In that referendum. So it kind of begs the question, what would a second people's vote look like? Who would be in charge of that? What would the information be? And would it give us another decision at the end of it? Would it change? And even if it did, if that was going to, you know, halt, obviously the ECG come back and said that we could halt Article 50 and we didn't need permission from the EU. You know, would that be an option? But, you know, it just worries me that people, again, would not know what they're voting for.
Yes, because there will always be a large number of people who just don't want to know or aren't interested, or, you know, or just can't be bothered learning and understanding. That is the big fear from a lot of people.
I just think, people, you know, we've talked about the Westminster processes there. It's too complicated to get your head round. So for most people, they're just getting on with their lives, and in a lot of cases just trying to survive themselves.
Absolutely.
So I'm not sure you've got the capacity to start working out what that process is in Westminster that's going to affect all the things that happen to you in your life. And I think you said it earlier on, that's quite deliberate.
Yes, it is. And in Scotland we had the benefit during our referendum campaign when Alex Salmond stuck to his guns about allowing 2 years for the process to take place. Down south they were against it and said this was him just stretching it out. But he knew that we needed 2 years to speak to each other. And what happened? We had loads of meetings in village halls. You had people talking to each other and discussing things. We became really well informed. And it was totally opposite to the kind of referendum that we had just recently. Was Scotland not congratulated by the rest of the world internationally for holding such a fair and competent referendum?
Yeah. But I think also internationally people are surprised it's the first country that ever voted against self-determination.
Oh my goodness.
Which caused a few raised eyebrows abroad. Like, how does that happen?
Well, it happens because of fraudulent electoral procedures. And that's exactly what is now being uncovered by some of our own amazing journalists like Adam Ramsey, who's uncovered the whole thing. Along with Carol Cadwallader and all these others. Peter Gagan, he's doing brilliant work as well. And that is going to get out into I mean, we've known about it for years on Twitter, but down at the other levels of the public's understanding, it will come out eventually.
Yeah. So what do you think? We said earlier on that this is uncharted territory, but obviously now she's lost the vote again. We're in uncharted territory. Do you think she's going to resign?
No, I think she's one of these stiff upper lip English Tories that will see it through to the end. She will have to be forced out, and probably by her own party, when they realise that they either have to split and the ERG lot go one way and the more moderate Tories go another way, and then she will be told to go, I'm quite sure. But I mean, the Lib Dems did that, didn't they?
Yeah. In terms of split, though, I mean, you could say the same thing about the Labour Party.
Yes, but I think that'll happen with them as well.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And that's... Do you think that's part of the issue around that? In England, you just... OK, you've got a bit of Lib Dems, you've got a bit of UKIP or whatever, but actually you've really just got two main parties.
Yes.
But these two parties have evolved and changed so much, and there's this group that believe this and this group that what we've seen over the last few months is that, and even last couple of years, that it's more and more difficult for them to have a consensus within their own party and therefore work together. There doesn't appear to be any common goal. There's a lot of kind of self agenda and kind of what I want to happen and what I think's good. There isn't a kind of bigger picture. I think in contrast what I'm thinking is in terms of the SNP, it's often said that although you've got people within the SNP that don't necessarily agree with each other on a variety of issues, they have a common goal of independence which allows them to gel together and compromise and come to the arrangements because that's the way they want to go. These other parties don't have that goal. They don't have that focus.
That's right. That's right. But what they do have is within, say, Labour, you've got the two groups. You've got Corbyn and his Momentum lot, who are very socially minded, and you've got the other group who they're socially minded, but they also realise that they have to work with businesses as well to create the wealth that will support people socially. I don't think Corbyn and his Momentum group give that a thought. They really are limited in their thinking as to how we're going to support people who are needing support. Where does the money come from? I don't know, maybe he's right. You know, Theresa May's magic money tree, there is such a thing. You know, government can print money.
Yeah. So do you think we're heading for a general election, and if so, what does that solve and what does that look like?
I would like a general election rather than just a people's vote, because that way they will say what they're standing for, and it'll give people an opportunity to vote for a party that is standing on a manifesto of A as against a party that's standing on a manifesto of B.
But the polls tell us that Theresa May or the Conservatives would be likely to win that general election again. And what
I'm not so sure.
what would the public be voting for if Corbyn's saying he will still deliver the Brexit outcome?
Well, both of them are delivering the Brexit.
Yeah,
she would say she's doing that as well. So there's no difference between the two.
What are people? Do you think that could lead to people being even more confused about what they're supposed to vote for?
One lot will vote for the so-called business party, which is Conservatives, who are trying to ruin our businesses just now. But I mean, they've always had the reputation of being a party of business. And people who, will walk past homeless people and not give them a thought. Whereas for Corbyn, you'll get an awful lot of people who are they're just not interested in businesses at all, and they want to take as much money off businesses as they can. And I'm afraid, much as I dislike him, Tony Blair was right. You need that middle consensus, which, let's face it, the SNP is so all-encompassing. It actually does cater for the business side as well as the social side.
But do you think that goes back to the agenda thing, that obviously they've got to compromise to get the agenda that they want at the end of the day? And I suppose but there was a recent survey done, and it said that I think was it Scotland or kinder people or something along that lines. I think
more socially aware
or something like that. Do you think it is that we up here just tend to care more about our community and our country, more about people, and wanting everybody to A, be okay, and B, just have the same equal opportunities, sort of? I suppose that's where the kind of baby box and all the early year stuff comes in. If you can have everybody having the same opportunity at that level, then it should potentially give them a grounding, and it won't do it for everybody, but potentially give them a grounding to be the best that they can be.
Well, I know I'll get knocked down for saying this, but I do believe we are different in Scotland. We have a different mindset to life, possibly because we live in a harsher climate, a more challenging climate, more challenging geographic areas. So you have to work together. And we're much more Scandinavian than we are, Southern Europe. And since being part of the EU, we've also embraced the European countries, but probably more the Northern European countries than the Southern European countries. But I do believe it's, because we have to fight to survive nature and the way it's doled out to us in Scotland, we probably do care more about people in general. And I know that will not go down well with a lot of my unionist colleagues, because they think that we're the same as everybody else, but I know we're not.
So finally, before we wrap up, Day, what's your thoughts on what the Scottish Government are going to think about today? Are they going to make a statement, or?
You mean in terms of another referendum?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, the First Minister's been quite clear that she thought that the Leave vote you know, was democratically unacceptable, given that Scotland voted to stay in. So, and she was calling for an extension.
Yes.
So it'll be interesting to see what their response is.
Yes. Well, I think we're still not at the stage yet where she can say, right, that's it, because there's still another couple of steps to go, isn't there? And this has been the problem, that we've got this vast number of people who are determined that we should be going now, you know, let's go now. And it's been jolly hard for the First Minister to say, well, just carry on, steady. We need to make sure that every opportunity has been given for them to solve the problem down south, and if they cannot solve it, then we'll go, but not until then. Because you've got all the people who voted no the last time who have yet to be convinced. A lot of them have already changed their mind, but there's still vast numbers that need their minds changing quick.
Anyway, that's all we've got time for tonight. Thank you, Dave, for coming in, and I hope the viewers at home enjoyed this, and we just have to watch this space for tomorrow, see what happens next.
Up in terms of the penalties, the other issue facing my constituents, Mr. Speaker, is the issue that when trains are cancelled, clearly the trains that do turn up are then overcrowded. Now, it is only a small distance commute, but we've had situations where people have been unable to get on later trains. I also had a constituent who was travelling further afield to York and had booked his